the meeting to order at 5:30. We'll kick off with our roll call. I'll ask your name and please state if you're here or not. Tiffany Edwards.
Present, thank you.
Vidal Francis.
Present.
Counselor Evans. Beth Blackwell.
Here.
Heather Buck.
Present.
Claire Syrette is going to be running a little bit late. She has jury duty. Thanks for her service to civic engagement. Gina Grimaldi is out today. Pete Knox. Rob Zako.
Here.
Scooter Milne.
Here.
Milne, pardon me. All right. Thanks everyone for being here. Do we have anyone online? The committee? Okay. Thanks, Brianna, for taking care of that. Anyone for public comment? Anyone here in the room for public comment? All right. Any staff updates? All right. It's real getting quick to the agenda items. Thanks, everybody. Okay, we're going to kick off with the City of Springfield Transportation and Land Use Briefing. Welcome to the meeting.
Red means it's on. Yes, it does. Microphone.
A little bit.
Is that going to drive you guys all nuts?
Yeah, it was going to
Yep.
get worse. Sorry.
All right. How's that one? That one sounds much better.
Yep.
All right. Well, good evening. Thanks for hosting us. My name is Drew Larson. I'm a senior transportation planner for the city of Springfield. And with me is...
I'm Chelsea Hartman, a senior planner on the land use planning team with City of Springfield.
And so tonight we were asked to kind of just give a rundown of our recent planning efforts, specifically focusing on the climate friendly and equitable communities and the work that we have done with that. So next slide, please. Presentation topics will include just kind of an overview of climate friendly and equitable communities, CFEC or CFEC. I will probably say CFEC more often than CFEC. Things that I've been working on specifically in the transportation world have been, the scenario plan. I'll get into it a little bit more, as well as an upcoming or forthcoming bicycle pedestrian master plan titled Walk and Roll Springfield, an active transportation plan for Springfield. And then Chelsea will dive into climate friendly areas and what that means for Springfield, the locations and next steps. Next slide, please. So the CFEC is a governor ordered DLCD produced set of rules to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. A number of the targets are reducing to by 2050 is we're trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And it's a multi-pronged approach, really looking at land use models, transportation issues, all of these types of things, really trying to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. And again, things that I'll be presenting on tonight, scenario plan. It's an update to the transportation system plan, this Walk and Roll Springfield, as well as the land use planning that Chelsea's working on, climate friendly areas. Other efforts underway, ODOT's doing a statewide multimodal inventory. It's basically formalizing, standardizing existing data between jurisdictions, evaluating gap analysis and those types of things. Anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. All right, next slide, please. Yeah, that one. That one's a good one. So the CFEC scenario planning, this is one of the legs of the stool in which we are trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions statewide. The scenario plan really came about from, I believe it was 2012 legislation setting these greenhouse gas reduction targets. So a few jurisdictions actually picked it up and carried this scenario planning forward. And we completed ours actually in 2015. But nothing has really been done since that it was regionally agreed to at the MPC, the Metropolitan Policy Committee. With the CFEC, it now mandates that we do these efforts. And so over the last year, year and a half, we picked it back up. We're reevaluating under current models. ODOT's using, or the ODOT and consultant are using this Vision Eval. It's a modeling software. That's as much as I know about it. That's very technical stuff that's kind of beyond me. But with it, you know, we recommend performance measures, regional performance measures for Central Lane. So that would be, you know, Eugene, Springfield, Coburg, Lane County, and LTD is involved as well. Next slide, please. I covered most of this slide. Again, we adopted it or not adopted, regionally agreed to in 2015 at the MPC. Next slide. So over the last year, year and a half, as I mentioned, we've been working on refining performance measures and jurisdictional targets. So these are regional performance measures that every jurisdiction is kind of going to adhere to, but each jurisdiction is going to have a different measure and outcome that we're trying to get to. So everything that I'll present tonight is Springfield specific. Eugene has its own, Coburg, Lane County. A few of the performance measures, there's an active transportation network increase. And so that's evaluating existing active transportation, and it's 440 miles of existing. That's multi-use paths, bike lanes, pedestrian access ways, these types of things. But our target is 598 miles by 2050. And that's 6 miles per year. And how we calculated the target is every planned project within our existing transportation system plan, every bike ped project, urban standards projects that adds bike lanes, sidewalks to roadways. And so we got 6 miles per year for the next 25 years or so to try to reach that goal. Now it is very ambitious, but we're going to be working towards it. Other measures, there's, it's not listed on the slide, but shared micromobility trips such as bike share, scooter share that did exist in Eugene. We have a 2024 base year thanks to a 3-year pilot that we expanded last year. And so we're just going to be looking to increase that little by little every year. And it's kind of up to the jurisdictions how we reach those measures. So they're expected so many trips next year and then the next year. And so we'll evaluate it every year, look at it, and is it meeting the standards? If not, what can we do to bolster it or change things to make it work? Including, you know, adjusting service boundary, providing more bikes, opening up more areas of town to bike share. Because right now we're very limited to downtown Springfield. It's not a very big radius. We've become more of a destination hub as well as apart from like an origin where most of the trips in Eugene originate. Other ones, we've got mode share. So trying to increase active transportation mode share, transit mode share while reducing single occupancy vehicle trips. And ones that specific to LTD, we've got transit specific ones. That's level of access or level of transit service. There's ongoing discussion about what that performance truly looks like. And I would actually point to Dave because he's probably, Dave Roth has probably had more conversations regarding the transit performance measures. But there's also access to frequent high capacity transit. And that's, you know, locating more housing next to high capacity transit or expanding high capacity. There's transit stops intersecting with pedestrian facilities. And so that's looking at enhanced crossings on like collectors, arterials. Is that curb bump outs? Is that pedestrian refuge islands within a certain distance of a transit stop so that people can safely cross the road to get to a transit stop? We're still refining that performance. Most performance measures we're still refining. And then finally for LTD is increasing the employer group pass. There's so many employers or large employers that participate, looking to increase that number over the next few years. Next, please. So next steps, over the next couple months, we are going to be hopefully finalizing the performance measures as well as finalizing the jurisdiction targets. They will be adopted through the Metropolitan Policy Committee, and then we will start to report to DLCD annually, a minor report, our progress towards these things. And then when we kick off our transportation system plan update that's required, we'll add these performance measures targets into our transportation system plan into a locally adopted plan. So it won't just be a regionally agreed to document. Yeah, I think that's about it for scenario plan. I feel that it's fairly informal. Do you have any questions regarding scenario plan before I move on?
Go ahead, Heather.
Thank you. You had mentioned that you had this scenario plan in 2015, but it pretty much been on the shelf for the most part. Was there some kind of barrier in implementing any aspects of it?
So I'm sure you know Springfield is a fairly small community and fairly understaffed for all of the planning efforts that we want to do. So for transportation planning, currently it's mostly just me. I do have some limited help. For the last, I don't even know how long, it's been one transportation planner trying to balance regional meetings, all the conflicting efforts that we're trying to do. And it really just took a low priority.
Go ahead, Rob.
I know way too much about this topic, but I would answer questions, say, not just for Springfield, but Springfield, Eugene, Lane County. It was political. There was no state requirement that the scenario plan be adopted. It was only to be developed. And so the local jurisdictions did develop it. And that was all they were required to do at that time back in 2015. Now there are new requirements.
Go ahead, Beth.
This might be a silly question, but on the performance measures on the single occupancy vehicle target to reduce that, how is that measured?
That's a great question. Let me see here. So let's see here. Baseline mode share values were calculated from the Lane Council of Governments, LCOG regional travel demand model for a base year, and they use that for 2020. Again, my technical knowing, or however, my technical prowess is pretty low on this type of thing. There's various inputs that go into the model that then spit out these mode shares. But there's also, this is tracked regionally, statewide, nationally, what is the mode share? And so it's mostly based off of these modeling softwares. And so in order to reduce that, what steps is the jurisdiction going to take? Hopefully all of the performance measures start moving the needle on the mode share split itself.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I have a question, just thinking about recognizing, staffing and all the things that go on. As the strategic planning committee supporting LTD, what would be something that could help, with the work that you're doing? How could this committee be helpful in the work that we're doing with, to support our board? And again, that's like maybe a big question, but again, just, can't promise all the things, but what would be something that would be helpful for this committee to use, to have a lens around, to be able to support the work that's happening? Just from my lens, I recognize multiple different, I think I'm actually I'm on a listening session that I'm going to be participating in for Eugene around the same urban growth boundary and housing, along with transportation as well. So I'm just thinking about the multiple jurisdictions, kind of everyone has here's my metric and here's their metric. And so just in the spirit of collaboration, what could be something that this committee as LTD serving the whole of Lane County do, or bring our lens to the table to be able to help support some of the work in Springfield?
It's an excellent question.
No pressure to, if there's something you need to think about, where Dave's at. So, but just, you can be thinking about that, but that's something, how can we be supportive in that effort?
And yet I'm forming great working relationships with Dave and Brandon. We did submit a joint application to try to do similar efforts that are happening in Eugene. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful, but I think, us working together, having a good working relationship is a good first step. But I will continue to think how best LTD could help us. Yes.
Go ahead, Gino. I'm sorry, Rob. Wrong names today.
I can offer an answer of maybe what could be done. I mean, thank you both for your work. This is really hard work. It's very complex. And I would say the city of Springfield and LTD for that matter, you sort of find yourself between the state and the people. You're being asked to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but the city of Springfield as a government doesn't produce most of those greenhouse gas emissions. It's people who choose to get around, and we don't live in a world where you tell people that they can't drive or whatever, or where they can or can't develop. So it's sort of, there are things that you can do. Sorry, I mean, long-winded here. You know, the
Have a
way
timer,
people,
so you're okay,
the way
Rob.
people have fewer greenhouse gas emissions is by taking shorter trips or by taking trips with less carbon intensive ways to get around. And that's a two-part thing. It's like where they're going to, a land use piece, and what are the transportation options. And I think the discussion is to coordinate those two. You know, when the city of Springfield is talking about where development occurs, have a conversation with LTD about what kind of transit can be provided and make sure those are aligned. And that probably is happening now, but maybe it could happen more than it has been happening in the past. I think that's the answer and the answer.
Okay, if I jump in for a second. Dave Roth, Director of Mobility Planning and Policy at LTD. I'm going to sit in for a minute here and try to answer that question. So I think having our City of Springfield partners with us tonight is really the start of that conversation. And so over the next year and a half or so, we're going to be kicking off and starting our long-range mobility plan. And that's really our opportunity to sort of step in after the scenario planning work is resolved and supported at the regional level. And before the cities get into their TSP updates, that's an opportunity for LTD to come in and to continue working with our partners and to figure out really how do we answer that question. I think if you look at the mode split goals and some of the performance metrics that we're going to be tracking towards, you know, it's our job to work with our city partners to make sure that we are doing the sorts of things that are supportive of those goals. And, you know, you don't plan transit in a vacuum. It's very dependent on land use and cities' transportation systems because they own the right of way in which we operate. So great question to start with. We're not going to be able to answer it tonight, but we'll get into it over the next few months. And I just want to say I really appreciate having Springfield here tonight to start the conversation with us.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, and again, my intention was more, how can we help support you so we can kind of come in and the volunteers can kind of bring more folks together in any ways you need. So thank you so much. And I know we have Chelsea as well going to be sharing too.
Yeah, I actually have one more topic.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
So with the CFAC requirements, it's updates to the TSP that requires more robust biking, walking planning, as well as a number of other things. And so I actually last fall decided to try to split these two efforts apart, do the transportation system plan when it's programmed for 2027 kickoff. But I really wanted to focus on the walking and rolling aspect of the TSP as a separate thing. And so we applied for and received a TGM grant from ODOT to update our, 1998 bicycle plan that is, 27 years old, to pursue these new CFAC requirements. So really, yeah, we had the 1998 bicycle plan. A number of those projects have been either constructed or partially constructed. We're at the end of kind of that list. But then we had our transportation system plan adopted in 2014, updated in 2020. It's a very good base for bicycle and pedestrian planning, but it's really the new requirements are looking to identify a complete active transportation network and then start implementing it. And so with that TGM grant, we've titled it Walk and Roll Springfield, an active transportation plan. I'm actually still kind of working on the name. I really like Walk and Roll Springfield, but Walk and Roll Springfield, an active transportation plan is a little long. So I'm still working on that. But yeah, so a number of things that are missing from the TSP, you know, it doesn't provide a level of specificity, like what type of facility needs to go along which corridor. We have a number of good projects that it says add bicycle facilities. When you look at bicycle facilities on our TSP, it ranges from sharrows, just a little paint on the ground, to true separated facilities, cycle track, protected bike lanes, all of that. And it's kind of just left it up to staff. And then subsequently taking it to city council being like, we'd like to do this. And so I'm really hoping that Walk and Roll Springfield identifies an actual facility type. And so that we can go after construction dollars a little easier. Next slide. So really, the purpose, Springfield has a long way to go, I think, with active transportation. Our Washburn, you look at development patterns, our Washburn area, downtown area is well connected. We have good sidewalks, low levels of stress getting to there. But as you go further and further out, the transportation patterns, development patterns changed, and it really became auto-centric. I have a couple maps here in a little bit that will kind of review gaps in our existing system that I'm hoping to identify. But really, we're looking to integrate with transit, try to be a little bit better there. Willamette Lane Comprehensive Plan was just adopted, I believe, end of last year by the Willamette Lane Board, sometime last year. But they have great regional recreational facilities. They've got parks, they've got open space, they've got multi-use paths, but we're lacking family-friendly, comfortable ways to get to those regional facilities. How do I get from my house to the park with my upcoming child that I'm going to be having this summer? Like, how am I going to do that? How is that going to happen? How do I get to, Doris Ranch on a bike without driving? And so really trying to connect recreation with active transportation, which would then subsequently bolster commute patterns. Next slide, please. So just some quick objectives. I'm still very much in the scoping of this project. I've got kind of my tasks and deliverables, those types of things outlined, but I don't have a lot of detail. But really, we're looking to improve safety and enhance accessibility. We'll do some crash analysis. We'll look at spot treatments to intersections. Will curb extensions be okay? Would mid-block or rectangular rapid flashing beacons be appropriate? Supporting economic development. How do we get from Thurston to the fast food restaurants or the restaurants that are out in Thurston? How do I safely do that? Or if I'm in Thurston, how do I get to downtown to visit our shops? And there's no real clear east-west connections currently. So I'm really hoping Walk and Roll fills in those gaps and that we can start to complete those networks. A big portion of the climate-friendly and equitable communities is an equity focus, so looking at traditionally underserved populations. And so while we produce new projects, we need to start prioritizing projects in underserved networks or underserved population neighborhoods. Looking at census blocks, I don't have a map, I apologize, but there's quite a few areas in Springfield that are low income, minorities, not able-bodied, don't own a home or own a vehicle that can get them places. So it's really just looking to bring Springfield together through active transportation. Next slide. So here on this map, this is actually our planned network in the existing transportation system plan. Good projects, but as you can see, that mid-Springfield and, with the Oregon 126, Bob Straub, there's just no real solid connectivity between Thurston and downtown, and then subsequently to the Eugene University of Oregon. And so I'm really hoping that Walk and Roll Springfield is we can get some good east-west connectivity. Now, there's a number of development patterns that happen that are going to be large hurdles. If you look at Springfield east of 28th, it's very auto dependent. There's not a lot of regular connectivity. There's no grid system really. There's large industrial sites that are in the midst of it. So I'm really hoping that we can get just us connected. And that's really all I have for Walk and Roll Springfield. Again, it's very much in the development stages. I'm still working through tasks and deliverables, but happy to answer any questions.
I love Walk and Roll Springfield, so I think we're just gonna keep saying it and make that happen. So thank you. Thank you. Rob?
I don't know if this is about walk and roll Springfield, but what's the status of Main Street in Springfield?
It is what it is. The Main Street Safety Plan has been shelved, shut down. It is what it is at this point.
So staff hasn't received any direction to be developing an alternative plan that the city council asked for a few summers ago. I'm just asking for confirmation. I'm not,
There's been no efforts to
Okay.
relook at Main Street.
thank you.
Dahl?
Hey, Drew, thanks for coming. Appreciate this. I'm going to kind of go back to your first presentation where you talked about 6 miles a year increase that you're trying to do, which I think is very good. In relationship to your current presentation that you just did, kind of showing your big plan there, any thoughts around how are you going to prioritize trying to get this 6 miles done per year within that plan that you're trying to do? I mean, things around missing links, connection points that you would like to happen or that could happen more, easily, or some low-hanging fruit areas that you could probably quickly get in there. Any thoughts around how you're thinking about approaching that? I know you just mentioned the east-west connection. You'd really like to make that a priority, but at 6 miles, if you could cut that up into 6 miles a year, what are you thinking about?
So for that 6 miles per year, really, the performance measure talks about bike lanes. So we're trying to get that changed to bicycle facilities because we have a number, like the street I live on, G Street, is a low volume. I mean, it's busy during pickup drop off for schools, but it is a low volume collector. I really envision that as a shared use space, like a greenway. We are trying to repave with our bond measure 10th to 23rd, and hopefully adding at least Sharrows to that. And so there's a number of miles right there because the 6 miles. So if we do a mile of road, but we get to count both sides for completing that. So that's 2 miles that year. And anytime we do, a preservation project, we try to add bike lanes or Sharrows or some sort. So we have a number of urban standards projects, removing vehicles to provide bike lanes.
So essentially you're counting them as you go.
Counting as I go, exactly. So if I add 12 one year and I don't add any the next year, I'm still meeting my goal.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you. That's fair.
Thank you. I want to recognize Councilor Greg Evans has joined us online, making sure I'm looking at Brianna to make sure. And his hand is raised. So Councilor Evans, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So my question goes back to as we're looking at this particular map and we're talking about, improving transportation, particularly on that Main Street corridor. I want to take you back a little further west to Glenwood. And, I was on the Eugene Planning Commission in the late 80s and early 90s when we basically, exchanged or changed over to Glenwood. It came into the Springfield urban growth boundary. And there were several plans in terms of economic development and commercial development along that corridor. And it seems that over the years that has stalled. And one of the things that was supposed to prop that was MX. Do you know what the vision is in terms of Springfield for Glenwood and how LTD can play an even more definitive role in promoting economic development in that context?
I can try to answer that. I think it's actually a good segue into getting into climate-friendly areas, since that's one of the areas we're focusing on to become a climate-friendly area. I guess I'll quickly say before I get into the presentation that Glenwood, there still is the plan for more economic development there. The city currently owns several properties on the eastern end of the riverfront area and is doing a master plan to develop it. And that is the hope of our public investment in the area hopefully will spur more private investment and development elsewhere. We're also hoping that some of the stuff I'll be talking about with climate-friendly areas will remove some barriers to development and make it a bit easier to develop in that area. I mean, it's difficult since a lot of it's not annexed. There's some infrastructure challenges. There's a long way to go, but there's still a lot of effort being focused on Glenwood.
Well, speaking of infrastructure, and then I'll keep my mouth shut and listen on this one. How is the roundabout that is right there on that edge working? You know, for Franklin Boulevard, working basically. It's on it's in your urban growth boundary. It's on Springfield's side of the line. And then we're also talking about and having conversations about a roundabout, on Franklin Boulevard, closer to the university on the Eugene side. So how is that enhancing travel through that corridor, and particularly with MX?
So I can't specifically speak to what happened before because the roundabout's been there as long as I've lived in the area. But I drive through it regularly going into Eugene. I think it works exceptionally well. We're in the next stage of actually planning another roundabout. We're in the design for, I believe it's at Mississippi Avenue. And so we're just continuing westward with that development pattern, roundabouts, separated facilities on both sides for bikes and peds, integrating transit, adjusting our stops accordingly. But I think it's working well. And as Chelsea pointed out, we are in a master plan for public-private development on the city-owned property. And that's moving forward. So it's happening. It's just planning pace.
Yeah. Last question on this same topic, and maybe Rob Zako's got some information on this too. What kind of statistics are you seeing in terms of enhanced safety for bikes and pedestrians vis-a-vis that corridor and the roundabouts, interfacing with MX and other modes of transportation there? I asked this at City Council work session a while back, and I didn't get a complete answer. So I'm wondering if you guys have an answer to that.
I unfortunately don't have a complete answer for you either. I don't have any statistics handy. I mean, we could certainly look at LCOG's data portal that has, bike ped counts, and they go back historically over the years, so we could see what's changed. I know that when I ride my bike through there to go to, Camp Putt or something, it is much better than riding on the rest of Glenwood or Franklin Boulevard. But unfortunately, I don't really have any statistics for you tonight.
Thank you for that question, Councilor Evans. So I'm going to just give Rob a minute to respond to that. And then if we need to have some more data, we can bring that into one of our next meetings.
I don't have any answers, but I wanted to underscore Councilor Evans' questions, and not just on the Springfield side, but the Eugene side as well. Franklin Main Street is a major corridor for LTD, for MX, highest ridership. There are existing roundabouts on the Glenwood side. The City of Eugene's talking about developing roundabouts on the Eugene side. I don't know how those are working currently. I think it's a really good question. It's a complex question. You get different answers for how it's working for people who have to cross there, for people who are blind or have wheelchairs, for people who are biking, for people who are driving, for people riding buses. And you may get different answers for different modes of travel of how well it is or isn't working. And I think as we move forward, Springfield is looking at what to do their questions, but I think as Eugene is looking forward to what to do in Franklin, the questions also rise. So I'm interested in getting answers to those questions, but not tonight.
Thank you. I'm going to capture so safety on Franklin Boulevard as one of our topics. Brianna, is there any other hands raised?
No.
I know, yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And so we are at 6:05, and I want to make sure that Chelsea gets a chance to do their presentation. So we'll go ahead and move into Chelsea. And I also want to recognize Claire Syrett. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for, again, doing your civic duty tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can we skip this slide and the next one? Okay, so I'm going to focus on the land use planning side of things and how that integrates with transportation planning. I'm going to be focusing on what we've been doing around climate-friendly areas, which is just one part of the broader CFEC rules that Drew talked about earlier. The climate-friendly areas, or CFAs, as I'll just call for short throughout the presentation, is required of cities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by identifying and adopting these areas that will allow for an urban mix of uses and options for people to get around without relying solely on a car. Some of the specific requirements that the state has in the rules, CFAs must be of a certain size. The main thing that we had to look at was the areas must accommodate at least 30% of our current and our future housing need, which is a little less than 10,000 units based on our last housing needs analysis that was done in 2011. These areas must allow for a mix of uses. So we focused on our existing mixed use districts, so where we already allow those things, and our nodal development areas, since those are really similar to what climate-friendly areas require. For you all, what's most relevant, these areas must be accessible by existing or planned high-quality bike, pedestrian, and transit networks. So the areas we identified are connected by the existing MX, Route 11, and then Mohawk was included because there's a planned frequent transit network for that area. And then the last big requirement is to include strategies for residents to help people stay in these communities as the costs increase over time when redevelopment occurs. So next slide. So primary and secondary CFAs, there's a few more specific requirements for each. We must have one primary CFA, and we have flexibility in designating additional primary or secondary CFAs that best meet our housing capacity requirements. For the primary, they allow buildings that are about 7 stories tall and have a required minimum density of 25 units per acre. So those are really more urban intense uses. Our existing Glenwood mixed-use districts that we have in Springfield already meet those primary requirements, so I'll talk a little bit about that more in a bit. And then for secondary CFAs, they have lower allowed heights and lower densities to try to allow a variation in the CFA requirements. Next slide. So another thing that's relevant for you all, one of the benefits of climate-friendly areas, once Springfield adopts them, how we invest our public dollars in infrastructure will help transform these areas over time. The public investments, they get prioritized under the new CFEC rules for climate-friendly areas for transportation investments and safe streets, more complete sidewalks, paths for walking, biking, and rolling, and better connections to transit. Another aspect will include prioritizing improved public spaces, such as parks, open space, and similar public amenities that are in or near these CFAs. Next slide, please. So the 4 areas that we've been looking at, this shows just kind of an overview of how they rank based on the different evaluation criteria and the state rules. These areas each have their own challenges, some more than others, and this just gives a quick way to see how suitable each of the areas are based on the CFA study findings that were done in 2023, and then more work we've been doing with Cascadia Partners, the consultant team we've been working with in 2024. Next slide, please. So we just went to council last month and got selection of our CFA locations. Based on our community feedback throughout 2024 and the benefits and trade-offs of each of the areas, council selected the Glenwood Riverfront as our primary CFA and downtown and Mohawk as secondary CFAs. This selection aligns well with our existing development regulations, so really we're just looking for alignment with where do we already have good transit or plans for more transit, same thing with biking and walking infrastructure, and where does our land use pattern already support this kind of requirement. This also accounts for another project we'll be having to work on in a few years is an update to our housing capacity analysis. So this recommendation plans for that future housing need. So not just what we're required to do today, but knowing that we're going to be needing to plan for even more housing in the next couple years. So some of the key changes for these areas, for the Glenwood Riverfront, the main thing will be to rezone it to Glenwood residential mixed use. This is really to allow a more flexible mix of uses. Right now, the Glenwood office mixed use district is a bit limiting since it requires at least 50% of that area to be office, and there's not much of a market for that kind of development anymore. And so we kind of want to level the playing field and just allow the market to decide what kind of uses can go in, but wanting it to be more mixed use and dense in Glenwood. So that's kind of the main change for Glenwood. For all three of these areas, I think as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of alignment with our existing nodal development areas, which were established, I think, in the 80s. So we're removing the nodal development and replacing it with these new CFA standards since they essentially function the same of allowing a mix of uses and more connections for biking, walking, and transit. For our downtown, there won't be a lot of changes either. One of the big changes will be to rezone some of our largely residential districts to allow for mixed-use residential. A benefit for the downtown will be to allow residential uses in our community commercial district. So right now it is commercial focused. This will allow both commercial and residential uses. And then Gateway Riverbend was one of the climate friendly areas that was on the table for quite a while since it is an existing nodal development area. And based on the infrastructure, market, and development constraints in that area, we decided to not move forward with that to become a CFA, just given its lower suitability and not much promise to produce new housing in that area. Next slide, please. So next steps, this is my last slide, and then I'll open it up for questions. So based on our council direction, we are now drafting the amendments to our Springfield Comprehensive Plan, the Glenwood and Downtown Refinement Plans, and our Development Code. I will be going to council work session on Monday, March 10th, this next week coming up, to provide an update on housing data, our new housing planning requirements, and as part of that, we'll be discussing new housing tools to include in the CFA adoption package. And that's really to help produce new affordable housing in these areas and to help mitigate any potential displacement that could occur. The housing tools that council will discuss on Monday will be further analyzed and vetted as part of our upcoming work on our citywide housing production strategy. So that's another big thing that's coming up with new state requirements, and that's due by December 2028. There will be more opportunities for community input this summer on the draft amendments before we begin the adoption process later this year, and that will be a joint adoption process with both Springfield and Lane County, since the Glenwood Riverfront will include some property outside of the city limits. And yeah, that's all I have. So any questions on that?
Thanks, Chelsea. I want to be really mindful. I'll have folks ask questions, but we are over the agenda. And I'm really trying to stick to making sure I'd like to get everything, even though staff's very generous for the time. So Claire, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and apologies. I'm just curious, you mentioned, Chelsea, about the CFA providing for greater investment in being prioritized for greater investment. You mentioned sidewalks and paths. Could you expand on that just a little bit, because that's new information for me?
Yeah, so that's part of the CFAC rules. So any areas that are designated a CFA, it's one of the prioritization criteria for how we select priority transportation projects as a city. CFAs get priority over other areas since that's really where we want to focus more walkability. I think there's a lot of other priority aspects like equity, like Drew was talking about earlier, is another thing to prioritize. The parks side of it, we will have to put something in our comprehensive plan about some policy to direct us, Springfield and Willamette Lane, to prioritize parks access as well. Thankfully, Willamette Lane's comprehensive plan that was just adopted last year already aligns really well with that, so we don't expect any changes there. But it could shift, what our TSP update will look like and how that fits in with CFAs moving forward.
So does that mean when you're trying to get funding through ODOT, for example, that if it's a CFA, has a higher priority than if it's another part of the community?
Makes it more competitive, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. You said that under state rules, about 30% or at least 30% of the projected housing need needs to be accommodated in CFAs. Is that sub-allocated to the primary and 2 secondary CFAs, or are all those 10,000 to go into the Glenwood primary area? What's the projection there?
That's a great question. It's between all 3 of the areas, and it is assuming that the way the state rules have it is you assume that these areas would fully redevelop to the maximum heights and densities that are allowed. So our primary Glenwood accommodates a good chunk of that housing, and then our downtown and Mohawk also contribute to it, but it's across the 3.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew and Chelsea. This has been lovely seeing you and having you as guests and sharing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and move into our rural services pilot update. And we'll be welcoming Brandon and John.
All right. Good evening, Chairperson Jesus and committee members. I'm Brandon Melton, Senior Development Planner with LTD, joined tonight by John Allen, the Mobility Services Manager, and wanted to provide an update on our rural shuttle pilot that we presented on at our last meeting and provide some context and background for how we came to establishing this pilot and seeking funding and being awarded funding for it. So first of all, wanted to acknowledge that we received your feedback from the last committee meeting, and you were heard, and we're working through addressing and reaching out to South Lane residents and helping them to understand what the changes will be to rural transit service, and I'll be discussing that later on in the presentation. But first wanted to start off with John providing some background on how we came to start down the road of initiating this pilot.
Yeah, happy to. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be able to speak with this group. So thank you for taking time with us today. So to begin, you all thought you were just getting a presentation on rural transportation services, but what I'm here to talk about is how this program is going to increase the lifespan of Lane County residents by years. We're going to tie all this stuff together, I promise. So the seed for this idea was actually planted by our CEO, Jameson, introducing me to the Lane Community Health Council led by Rhonda Busick. So we started doing some work together. We've done plenty of work in the past in Medicaid and Oregon Health Plan issues in our community. And Jameson just kind of casually threw out, John, in your spare time, why not solve food insecurity in Lane County? So I haven't had any spare time, but that never stops us. So I've got our plan today, and it's going to tie into how our rural services are being structured. So let me just flip a little bit, and I'm going to talk about how the rural services portion ties into this. City of Cottage Grove was in charge of administering services in the South Lane area and approached LCOG and LTD and said, what do you think about taking over transportation programs? This is something y'all do. You have expertise. Would you be willing to administer it from here on out? We said, well, try it out. And so LTD was able to put some resources forward to be able to help support service. LCOG was able to find some discretionary grant funds to be able to support services for a pilot program for this current biennium. Those resources disappear at the end of June of this year, so the pilot program officially sunsets. And LTD has put forward its own discretionary grant application, which has been successful to be able to begin a new rural pilot program starting July 1st. So that's going to be what we're here to talk with you about today. The structure of this program is built upon LCOG's Transit Development Plan, or TDP. So this is extensive research that's been done to be able to help identify what our community needs are, where we need to be, where people need to go. So this was a extensive effort that included and led by members of ODOT and LCOG, but it included a diverse advisory committee that included LTD staff, City of Cottage Grove, City of Creswell, City of Oak Ridge, City of Veneta, City of Florence, Lane Community College, Lane County, Travel Lane County, Siuslaw Vision, and many others to be able to help determine what our community needs are. Outreach was actually more extensive than that. So it included an online survey, live events that were held that people could be able to come to be able to express their opinions, draft feedback that we got additional edits on, and culminated with going before the LCOG Board of Directors for final review. The goals of this align really closely with LTD's mission, vision, and values. And it's a over 50-page document. You're welcome to read it all, but I'll summarize the result for you. That the idea is that it provides guidance for an equitable, safe, convenient, and connected transit network throughout Lane County that will support the health and well-being of individuals, communities, the economy, and the environment. Sure sounds like what we do around here, right? So getting us back to how we're going to help Lane community residents live longer, we're going to be talking just briefly about social determinants of health. So World Health Organization tells us that 20% of essentially what's going to wind up being our lifespan is actually determined by clinical care, going to a doctor, going to hospitals, getting the types of medical care we need. 50% is social determinants of health. This can be things like poverty, employment, education. There's a lot of different factors that can go into it. But this is mostly neatly summarized, and the number one factor that determines our lifespan more than any other factor is where we live. What zip code we live in is the biggest determination of our lifespan. And if you think about it, the zip code is a proxy for many of the different things that will influence the behaviors that and how we live our lives. So it can be shorthand for, imagine someone who's trapped in a community with only one corner store and all you can afford is some junk food. You're going to find that on average, these residents are going to have higher cholesterol, higher blood pressure, more days of hospitalization, and fewer years of life. So one hospital study showed that simply by providing options for healthy breakfast and dinner ingredients decreased average blood sugar, A1C, if you're into the technical part, levels of participants by 20%. And every percentage point in A1C decrease directly correlated to $8,000 in savings in healthcare costs, or approximately $160K in healthcare costs per person for investment in $1K per person per year. So that's a pretty great return on investment, right? 8% of Lane County residents are in what we call zero vehicle households, and many more don't have reliable access to nutritious foods. So we will remove transportation barriers to accessing healthy foods and begin reclaiming the food deserts in Lane County. In doing so, we're directly going to contribute to Lane County residents leading healthier, longer lives. So to do that, I've joined with Grow Lane County and the Lane Food Security Coalition. And currently, we're planting the literal seeds that will become food that's going to come to food banks. So we're working with local farming communities to be able to grow healthy food options that we will then make sure is available in food banks and areas that places in rural residents will be able to access. Our job, our mission from there is to be able to connect people to those food hubs, to social services in the areas, in places that have been identified as most in need throughout Lane County. So tell us a little bit more about what that's going to look like. Mr. Melton, you want to
Thank you, John.
take us through it?
Yeah, absolutely. So last time we provided some maps that were pretty rough and difficult to read on the screen. So we provided some colored printouts this time so you can see. And as I'd mentioned before, these service areas were defined in that Link Lane Transit Development Plan is what we were really sourcing our service areas around. And so you can see on the map for Oregon 36, it goes from Deadwood. The service area shows all the way to Florence. We're going to work with LCOG and connecting riders, not just to social services and food bank in Mapleton, but also trying to connect to their Eugene, Florence existing trips that are going between Eugene and Florence. So it'll provide an opportunity for folks to access service there, even potentially Eugene as well. So that's, we're considering 1 day per week and 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And a lot of that is driven around, where it's situated as a pretty rural area. So there's headways on either end of the day. And so we have to take that into consideration with operating hours. Next slide, please. The next area that we're going to be serving is Mohawk Valley. Again, we're going to start with 1 day per week. We're being mindful of the resources that we have available and really want to utilize those most efficiently as we can. Service for that is a little bit more expanded from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And now these are the initial service days and hours. And as it's a pilot project, we can look at how well those areas are performing and get feedback throughout and make determinations on if we can expand service additional hours or days. We're also looking at some potential connections in Springfield, such as Pioneer Plaza, Springfield Station specifically, and connecting folks to our fixed route system at the where it's most robust along MX, as well as some areas that folks would be interested in getting direct services such as McKenzie Medical or Winco or Walmart to access those services and goods. Next slide, please. And then South Lane County. So really South Lane County, we're focusing on connections to services in Cottage Grove and connecting folks to Route 98, our fixed route service that serves Cottage Grove between Cottage Grove and Eugene. This area, we want to start with 2 days per week, recognizing that those residents have seen service 5 days a week previously and have expanded hours of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So trying to provide a good level of service there to connect people to Lifeline services and continue as best we can with the resources available. So this, you'll notice this map looks a little bit different. We did work with LCOG to refine the map based on about a 1/4 mile buffer from center lines, roadway center lines, to better reflect the area that's actually being served. We're not driving out into the hills to pick folks up necessarily, but we did confirm that all the riders that have previously used Metro Shuttle are captured in this service area. So no one's really being left behind in that way. Next, I just wanted to talk a little bit, next slide, about the outreach that we're doing. I mentioned at the beginning, and we received that feedback, and I think it was excellent feedback that we should be reaching out to the folks that are going to be most impacted. And so we'll be sending a survey to Metro Shuttle customers, previous Metro Shuttle customers, by direct mail. They'll have opportunities to respond by a paid return envelope, giving them as many options to respond as possible, allowing them to respond online or even to call us, and we'll walk them through the survey and try to get information from them. We're also going to work with South Lane Wheels as the current operator to hand out surveys directly to riders as they're getting on the bus. We created a website, FAQ, that we can direct folks to provide a little bit more detail and context around the service changes. We'll also be developing postcards. Another service was the Origin to Destination, which was a scheduled service where folks in Cottage Grove or Crestwell could request trips at specific times. That's being replaced by really an increase in service for Cottage Grove and dedicating more resources to the Cottage Grove Connector service, which is really a mobility on demand service. We still want to explain that there's going to be a change in how they're riding and getting around the area, but they should have a good replacement service. And I believe that's all I have to say about that. John, did you want to share a little bit? We did do some analysis around current ridership, understanding how folks are using the service, what they're using it for. And we did identify that a large portion of the rides were based around commuting. And the commuters were folks that were relying on that transportation due to developmental disabilities. But John, you can explain a little bit about some of the connections that you've been making around those riders in particular.
Yeah, so our RideSource service currently does that. So I think the natural solution for us was to connect these folks with existing services. We have a contract with the state, particularly to provide transportation to work sites for folks with developmental disabilities that are connected with a case manager through the state. So we are working with local brokerages just to make sure that we can continue those same types of services, and I think in a more efficient manner than they've been used to receiving them. So I think overall what we're describing is we're trying to create efficiencies and improvements based on our limited experience from this current biennium of running services throughout Cottage Grove and South Lane County. And what we're trying to accomplish is to both increase services to serve the most number of people. So in Cottage Grove as a population center, we're significantly increasing transportation services within the Cottage Grove city limits. And we're trying to reach the most number of residents in need that we can throughout Lane County. So we're significantly expanding the scope and reach of where we're able to go with our rural programs. So with the intention that even if it's just one day a week for some residents, that's going to be a significant change and improvement in the transportation services that are provided. So we want to make sure there's time for questions if anyone had any.
Tiffany will be first. But before, I just want to thank you very much for taking the feedback from the last meeting and the mindfulness and the time that went into that with this presentation today. So Tiffany, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys. This is really awesome information. I was curious, so it's a pilot. So is it 1 year pilot or have you identified the 2 year? Is that what?
Yeah,
okay.
so we're using a combination of stiff discretionary, 5311 and stiff formula funds, and those are all on a 2 year cycle. So that'll begin July 1st.
Perfect. Okay, so then my real question though was, I think you touched on a little bit, but I'm curious like what kind of metrics that you're looking at to determine success. You mentioned ridership. Is there anything in addition to that like what they're using the service for? I think you mentioned too, but I'm just kind of curious how you're looking to quantify that.
Yeah, I think it'll be important to see how folks are using the service. Ridership is a huge indicator of if the service is popular, if it's working or not. Nice thing about the pilot is we do have some latitude to change some variables to see if it works better for folks. And we're also already doing some outreach to food banks to see what some of those critical services when they're operating to make sure that our service is aligning with those. So I would say the trip type is one. We do have some information from the TDP around the demographics of the folks that we will be serving in those coverage areas. So that's something that we want to take into consideration, that they're going from zero service to actually having public transit available to them. So those are things that we'll want to look at, and we want to look at the cost efficiency as well. To some degree, this isn't meant to be the most efficient service. It is meant for coverage. So we need to understand what that looks like for us and to understand how rural service might evolve in the future for LTD.
Right. I would add that we are going to learn and make changes as this pilot program progresses. So I think some of our goalposts or milestones may change over time, but just to add, I think the nature of these services, we are going to be closely monitoring cost per trip, subsidies, things like that. But we already know before the pilot program even stops, this is going to be more expensive than service that's in town, right? So to be able to go to rural areas, it's by its fundamental nature, it's going to cost more than if we're providing service in the metro area. But acknowledging that, I think we're also noting these are going to be some limited lifeline services that are going to have a big impact. And so I think that's where we're referencing the transit development plan, the excellent work that LCOG and ODOT has put together with the community. And that outlines, I think, some of the different kind of needs that the community has that we're trying to be able to meet with a program like this. Looking at ridership is a primary success metric for us. So we need to make sure that we're able to actually connect folks with services. And I think at this early stage, we're still adapting what that might look like based on the feedback that we're receiving. So I don't want to provide this metric needs to be met for it to be successful or not at this point in time. I think that's going to be a bit of a moving target. As we continue to learn and grow through this program, though, I think we're planning to be able to provide kind of more of a final analysis of what that's going to mean over the course of the pilot program period. So that's certainly kind of first and foremost on our minds, is making sure that we have goals, milestones, and clear success measures.
Thank you.
Rob, did Tiffany answer your question, or? I just want to make sure. Did Tiffany answer your question?
Well, Tiffany asked part of my question. You gave part of the answer, but I think it's really important. I'm trying to understand the pilot aspect of this. Is it a pilot to learn something? Like, are you trying to learn, is there a viable business model here? And after 2 years, you either say, yes, this is something worth continuing doing, or no, it's not. Or do you sort of already see that there's a need there and you're trying to figure out sort of what is the best way to deliver services? I'm just trying to understand what it is you're trying to learn and get out of 2 years of pilot.
Yeah, you want to go ahead, John?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the transit development plan has done great work in identifying the need exists, so we know that. I think as a transit agency, we're forced to make these decisions where we'd like to be able to go everywhere all the time, but we have to make tough choices on where we're allocating resources. We believe this can be a good use of resources to be able to help rural residents to make these connections in this way. We are going to learn through the pilot program if we're correct in our assumption in that.
Let me just ask a follow-up question. I mean, I guess I'm wondering, are you comparing it to other ways to deliver services? For example, maybe you just give Uber vouchers to everybody and fine, then it costs a tenth of much, or some fraction of what this costs. Is there sort of like some sort of comparison, or again, I'm trying to understand what you're trying to.
I'm going to step in again. Excuse me. I like where you're going with that, Rob. I think that's helpful to sort of bring ideas like that to the table and for us to think about. I guess what I would suggest is that we engage the SBC in that conversation, potentially at our next meeting, in terms of providing some draft performance measures that we can get your feedback on, and then you can help us sort of determine specifically what those are, and that'll help us. This is the kind of service I think we heard. It's very expensive. So, we don't necessarily just use ridership as a metric, although it's an important metric for us. It's not maybe the determining factor on why you would continue a service like this or institute this beyond a pilot project phase. So that's what I would suggest. Yeah.
Typically, the way I think about it is if we wanted to be the most efficient with resources and serve the most number of people, we would just put all of our focus on MX. However, to serve the whole community, it requires us to go further and broader and think of it in that kind of a way. So it's the really good questions and I think a thoughtful approach as we're exploring this further.
Claire and then Heather.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And I really want to validate where you started with the sharing of the social determinants of health and the impacts of folks struggling to access healthy food, healthy diet, and the incredible impact that has on,
as you pointed out, the savings in healthcare costs, the savings in terms of life expectancy, you know, being greater, and so that person therefore being able to be more productive in our community. And so I do think there's a way, you know, that we could look at those measurements and what's the value of this service in a different way, and I find that innovative and exciting. So, and I appreciated that you pointed out, you know, you're going to talk to the food banks and make sure that your service is aligned to the times that they are open, right? And I wondered if it would make sense to actually have the food bank be asking people, how did you come here, right? And I think the aspect of adaptation is really important, and recognizing that it's not going to be efficient. It's not necessarily going to be cost effective in the sense of, you know, we have this infrastructure, we have these drivers, and we're having them do this work. And obviously the fare isn't going to cover the cost. And as you said, if we wanted to make that our main metrics, we would just build out MX and have that be the thing. So I think the way I'm viewing this, and I wasn't at the last meeting when apparently you got a lot of feedback about something. I think the idea of piloting this, you know, I'll step back for a second. I served on the Lane Act for many years, and these were the types of things I saw that group struggling with, right? Like, how do we provide transit in a meaningful way for folks in these less populated areas who, you know, are still part of this, in this case, the transit district. And I think piloting this, testing it out, seeing what kind of impact it has on people's lives, and then, you know, if that impact is significant enough, figuring out how we make it viable. It doesn't mean it's paying for itself, right, in terms of what this transit district does, but it's paying for itself in the greater gains that our community makes in terms of employment, health, mental health, all of those other metrics. So I think those are really important to be considering. And so I appreciate where you started this presentation and making that a piece of how you look at these services.
Thanks, Claire. Heather, and then Scooter, and then we're gonna cap it for the questions here, because I think we're gonna have some time to talk more about metrics later.
Thank you, Chair. The pilot area for West Lane County goes along the same, I believe, goes along the same lines as Link Lane. So is this in addition to Link Lane, or is that Link Lane area going away and this is a substitute? Or is there a way that Link Lane is not incorporating what you're incorporating here as a duplicative service?
Yeah.
I'm curious about that.
Sure. I think we're going to be working with LCOG to connect folks, you know, along between Deadwood and Mapleton to the Link Lane stop in Mapleton. And as part of the nature of the pilot, we're going to see, you know, is that sufficient connection, or potentially we could see trips that go all the way to Florence. So I think that we haven't made a determination, but it's part of the pilot and how we can deliver that service.
Yeah. To be clear, though, the section of Highway 36 that we're looking at between Deadwood and Mapleton is not currently served by any public transit option.
And not Link Lane either? Okay.
Here along 126.
Oh, you're looking at the top portion,
Yeah.
the top right portion. I see what
Correct.
you're saying. Okay. I'm curious about that, because if Link Lane is already in that area almost every day, if not every day, and there's just a section that they're not serving, could they just not serve that area and the funding for your pilot go to the other areas?
We've had good conversations with LCOG throughout this current biennium about the who does what portion of the different services. And I think we've had some really good conversations to make sure that we can have service be as efficient as possible. The Link Lane portion of service is running generally weekdays. And what we're proposing is just one day a week, we would provide a connection just to be able to get folks from essentially Deadwood all the way to Mapleton so that they can connect to transit system. The way we have the service currently structured, LTD would administer the entirety of the rural program. So we would look for a provider that can provide service to all of these areas together.
But this map is showing that it goes all the way from Deadwood to Florence, right? And 2/3 of that is served by Link Lane. Am I incorrect? Am I missing something?
Right, Link Lane goes back and forth between Eugene and Florence, so and I'll just to clarify that this map is directly from the TDP, and the TDP identified this particular linkage as an important linkage for a rural service. As Brandon mentioned, we're still designing this. I think if we have the resources that would allow it, we would probably try to go all the way to Florence, but we might not be able to make that full connection with the new service. There's also issues of, well, diverting Link Lane to go up to Deadwood is probably a non-starter for those trips that are going back and forth between Eugene and Florence. That would add a lot of trip time to.
So I just want to say I'm reading something incorrectly, I think, because I interpret these maps as these are all the areas that your program is going to go. But what you're saying right now is it's just from Deadwood to Mapleton, and you might expand to Florence. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. That's kind of where we are right now with this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I needed that clarification because to me, it looked like duplicative service.
Gotcha.
And why would we do that? So thank you. On the other two maps, are you servicing the entire green area as on those two maps? Okay. And I know for sure there's no service on Mohawk and Marcola currently, of course. I did get some of my questions answered since our last meeting, so thank you. I appreciate that for all who were able to do that. I have to say I continue to be concerned that we're moving from one pilot that served South Lane multiple days, and that pilot's ending, and now we're starting a new pilot with less service in the area with a population hovering around 10,000 people, where you're going to get people like more people on those routes. I'm curious how it will measure up, and hopefully there'll be an analysis at some point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Scooter?
I just wanted to mention real quickly that just as a student representative here, there's a lot of stuff about this that I don't understand and I'm not familiar with the area, but I wanted to mention that based on how you started this presentation here, I understand that there's a lot of numbers that have to be accounted for. I understand that you have to try and validate those numbers to a lot of people for a lot of reasons. But what jumped out at me was initially that you came out with all these numbers of this is what affects people's longevity, this is what affects communities, yada, yada. But really, you're just trying to do this for the right reasons. And I just wanted to bring that up and say I appreciate hearing that, because I don't think communities hear that very often these days. And I think we should hear it more. Maybe it'll be too expensive. Maybe it'll be a money drain. We don't know, but it's going to help improve people's lives that really need it. So thanks for at least really trying to do that, because gosh knows we need more of that.
Thank you for that great transition to the next conversation, Scooter. Appreciate it. And then again, echoing Scooter's sentiments. And I know we have we will work on having some more data conversations at the next meeting around this. And this is a good opportunity for us to say this is why we extended the meeting to 2 hours. And so we might want to consider going back to, I just want to be really mindful, maybe having a monthly meeting. So Dave and I will talk about that, and Tiffany later. Thank you both, Brandon and John,
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you all for
Yeah,
your
we
time.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
All right, we're gonna have Sam come up. Thank you, Sam. And I recognize that we are being very creative with the agenda timeline right now, so and there's big important pieces to get through, so we're really wanting to hear about this particular part, so thank you, Sam.
I'll get my phone here for my time, just in case. Good evening, all. Hi. So my name is Sam Kelly-Kwatrocki. I'm the Government Relations Manager for LTD. If I've met you yet, pleasure to meet you all tonight. I'll be going over sort of high-level looks at federal legislation, state legislation, where things are and relate to transit, LTD, the state of things. Just a quick note, these slides were made a few weeks ago. Things are rapidly changing at all levels. I kept them very high level intentionally, so you may not see notes on the slides, but know that I have pages of notes to talk about and go through things. And then for those who are celebrating, happy Ramadan, happy Mardi Gras. For the rest of us, myself included, happy National Grammar Day. Very important today. Today is the only day that's a complete sentence. So we will march forth. On to our next slide, please. Thank you. So again, my agenda is up here behind me. Federal updates, state updates, time for questions. I'm happy for questions during. It seems like afterwards is more your speed, so we'll do questions afterwards. And I apologize for the feedback in my stage voice. Next slide, please. Okay. So federal updates, maybe a bit of history where we are, how we got here. So in President Trump's first month and a half or so, over 100 executive orders, of which 30 so far have at least tangential impacts on transit, although none have directly mentioned transit by name. These impacts come at pausing IIJA, the IRA funds. We sort of saw a couple memos from OMB coming out months ago about a big freeze and then 24 hours less of a freeze. So we're working through all of that. LTD did have a grant on that first federal freeze. The TANG grant was on there. So we were tracking that for a very frantic 24 hours. So currently what we're seeing funding wise, no impacts before January 20th. Anything else that was obligated is kept that way. But we are not seeing a lot of new obligations, not a lot of new NOFOs coming out, notice of funding. So funding is definitely being paused and slowed down. And then one of maybe the more impactful executive orders, so 14-159, protecting the American people against invasion. So this was looking at sanctuary jurisdictions, which Oregon, Lane County, Eugene are all coming out very strongly in favor of, and reducing funding in those areas directly. So LTD not directly named in that, but very aware of the landscape we're in, looking at the Oregon makeup versus federal makeup, Democratic versus federal, supermajorities on both sides there. So we're looking forward to some very complicated couple of years of negotiation and debate. After sort of the slew of executive orders, Secretary Duffy was appointed to Department of Transportation. A lot of what we were seeing is once they had their secretaries in place, then we were seeing more targeted cuts, more direct action. That's generally typical of a new team, but this is much more targeted at pausing, freezing, looking at funds to pull back. Secretary Duffy put a memo out. This sort of highlighted local compliance with federal immigration and ICE again, that all benefits must outweigh the costs. Part of that math included going back to a 2003 metric of the cost of carbon. So looking at what that cost was, 2003, kind of that offweighs some of those things. Focusing on families, high marriage rates, high birth rates, looking at dedicated funding, which was a first for a lot of folks to see social engineering through transportation funding. There were some other things that LTD is already doing. It's maximizing benefits, focusing on job access, healthcare facilities, commercial activities, reducing pollution, harmful impacts. Again, all through things LTD already does. So we were excited to see some of that language in there. A bit of a note that some of the deep divers are looking into, there was a line about they cannot be used for projects that are purely local in nature, unrelated to federal funds. There's a line in Project 2025 that we've seen kind of be a groundwork for a lot of this work that does identify transit as purely a local issue, that there is no federal nexus to transit, that's a local problem. Haven't seen that come out of Secretary Duffy yet, but that is sort of floating in the back of my mind and a few folks in DC about what that local nexus means or looks like. And then agencies are developing new language, new grant language. There is, again, a line in some of these grants where federal partners can go back and amend them after the fact. We haven't seen that yet. I'm not saying we will, but that's, again, something we're kind of watching. And no new grants have come out, so we're not sure what new requirements will look like actually in grant language. How much of these are just they want to have versus it's in the grant, you got to do it. Talking about trade and tariffs briefly, since they're hot on my mind this morning. So we are seeing 10%, 20% on China right now, 25% Canada, Mexico, steel, aluminum tariffs as well. All that to say, they're out there. There's a lot. The impacts of transit, again, hard to see directly where they are, other than just everything's to get a lot more expensive here. Steel and aluminum, especially in my mind, about new bus being built, how the facilities look, those costs of things. Shifting to the United Front. So for those of you who don't know, United Front is our group federal lobbying effort. So we partner with Lane County, Eugene, Springfield Schools, 4J, Willamette Lane Parks and Rec, and ourselves. And we lobby in DC together. We spend all year prepping priority projects, goals, guidelines, and then bring that together. We'll go in early April on my birthday. So I'm thrilled for that little treat to be in DC on my birthday. Part of our focus this year will be the Attain grant. Part of this trip, we get a chance to meet with our legislators, our senators, and our congresswomen. So part of this is a thank you for supporting that, getting us the funds, and then followed by, now please protect it. We want this money. We want to do this project. How are you fighting for us? Similarly with formula funds from FTA, it's a major part of our funding. Not directly targeted yet by anyone in DC, but there has been talks about reducing paperwork or requirements, or rather than receiving several buckets of formula funds, maybe you just get one big pot of money, have a nice day, go forth and spend. So trying to protect that, keep that secure for our use. And then a big chunk of this group is supporting our other United Front partners. So we all agreed for the past 40 years, any funding for our region is better than no funding. And the way that looks is making sure we're not competing for grants, complementary projects, backing each other up. So I think we'll see Lane County looking at a new weather station or some radar systems. The ice storm last year really pointed out we are in a weird Venn diagram of coverage. So looking at that would be a great solution. Springfield and the levee is always in my mind. I came from Springfield before this, so I love our levee, always my favorite project. And then maybe the last little piece is our federal budget, our earmarks. Where are we? So the current continuing resolution ends on March 14th. That's how long they've appropriated last year's budget for this year. If you have a crystal ball, if you can read some tea leaves, I would love to know what your proper answer is. Our partners in DC are on both sides of a shutdown or of a year-long resolution, in which case they would just pass last year's budget for the entirety of this year, and then October of 25, they would pass FY26, and that would be their own budget that they got to make themselves and kind of have full control over. So if that happens, our FY25 earmark wouldn't go forward. That was for a request for some charging stations for some non-revenue vehicles here, and then, well, it's Ride Source. But for FY26, and I'd hope to get a little more feedback from you all, but these timelines come randomly. We had to already submit. So hopefully you like these ideas. We have two coming in. One is for a bike share program. So looking at the lovely Peace Health bikes, they've been here for a while. They could use a refreshing. So be looking at buying brand new infrastructure, the physical components of the bike share, and then integrating and modernizing it with our current system to kind of make that bike transit, bus transit, bike transit, and more seamless process. And then our second one's an ADA safety and security upgrade, looking at our wheelchair securement systems. Currently, they're kind of all over the place in our buses, so we're looking at 2015 on, updating them to these more Q-straint systems where it's sort of a mechanical arm comes down, squeezes your chair in place for you. This kind of provides independence and autonomy for our riders, and then it keeps our operators in their driver's seat. No need to get up, flip things in. It's all remote control by the person in the chair. So those two have been submitted for Senate side right now. Congresswoman Hoyle hasn't opened up her portal yet. Pretty standard, usually senators go first, and the Congresswoman follows. She can only do 15 projects. Senators can do as many as they want to support. So we'll kind of see them negotiate in behind the scenes, and we'll advocate for ours and our partner projects as well. Next slide.
Can I ask a little bit about federal stuff before you go to state? This is really helpful, Sam.
Sure.
Thank you for like sort of a big overview.
Yeah.
I know none of us have a crystal ball, but there is a blueprint out there. What does Project 2025 say specifically about transit?
Yeah, it says a lot. And I read it months ago, and I meant to refresh myself before tonight. You know, I hate to give you a bad answer on this one. I owe you a better answer than this. It's in there. It's talked about a lot.
You can follow up later.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be eloquent follow up later. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Claire?
I was going to ask you to name the United Front partners.
Oh, sorry. So it's Lane County, cities of Eugene and Springfield, ourselves, Willamette Lane Parks and Rec, Springfield Public Schools, and 4J school districts. Those are the ones now. Yeah, of course. All right, next slide then. We'll go on to state stuff. Okey doke. So Oregon legislative session, we're in session right now. We started back in January. This is our long session, so 160 days of fun. So far, so again, my slides are old. These are already, numbers are way wrong. So we're over 3,300 bills have been introduced, and LTD is tracking well over 75 of them. 50 was what I wanted. We're at 75. 100 is hopefully more than we need. So 75 feels like a good spot to be. So some of the key deadlines, February 25th, that was the last day to introduce new bills. So that was the big cutoff day. About 400 or so bills dropped on that day, just in case. There are still a few more ways to wiggle in a few bills. A few of the committees have special privileges. So the joint committees, Revenue and Ways and Means, I believe, can still introduce bills. And then each legislator gets 5 priority bills they can kind of throw in there when they want to. So if someone wants to advocate, lobby to them, they could use one of their 5 for that. And we'll still see that. And then amendments. We know there are a few placeholder bills. One of my favorite on the Committee of Transportation is the speed bump research. There's 3 or 4 bills on that. We all know it's a placeholder. They'll amend it at some point, fill it full of 100 pages of hopefully a transportation package, and that's what we'll see. April 9th is when bills must have their first hearing in their chamber. If they don't have that, they're then dropped, and then they go over the other chamber for a hearing, and they need to have that by May 23rd. If they don't have that, that's when it ends, and then June 29th is sine die. Are my dates wrong there, Rob?
I think it's different for joint committees, and a lot of the bills you're tracking may be in the Joint Committee on Transportation.
Thank you. Yeah, so joint committees are again outside the rules of normal committees that they get to hold the different deadlines. Thank you. But everyone holds the June 29th. If your bill isn't voted on, it's gone. We'll see you next year, hopefully. So of these 75-ish bills, what are we tracking? What's kind of high priority? Labor rights are still taking kind of the dominant cycle right now. We're seeing striking employee insurance, definitions of mental health, age discrimination, what goes on pay stubs. That sort of dominated the conversation, the news cycle, and some of the hearings. The protections for striking employees, so that insurance and premium we're seeing. Housing, always a governor's focus, whether it's production, whether it's working on homelessness and unhoused communities. That's one of her priorities, so we'll still see packages for that. Revenue and taxation, I think for us, we'll look more towards transportation package for that, for what it could include, but we could see things more gas tax, registration fees, road user fee potentially. Some months ago, ODOT put out their need for funding, and that included about a $2 increase to the gas tax. I don't think $2 is reasonable, but it was a great conversation starter. Really got some folks fired up. From there, sales tax, property tax reform. I think locals are pushing harder on these 2 ideas. I don't think the state's ready for that kind of conversation, but I think either one of those would shore up our wobbly 3-legged stool of financing at the local level. But sales tax in Oregon is, I don't know, never going to happen. On the transportation package, what we want to see hasn't been released yet. I'm super disappointed. I would have loved to walk you all through 160 pages of that, but we'll wait till next time, hopefully. They're a few weeks late. But we're looking for that for transit, for the Oregon Transit Association, to give you some numbers for increasing service to 30% by 2035 or 85% by 2050. This is going to require an increase of about $625 million in our STIF by about 2030. So these are numbers we've got, and then ODOT was able to provide some analysis as well. So looking at kind of that goal, where we are right now, about 109 million across the state, increasing STIF by 0.1% every biennium until we're at 0.5%. So that would be until 2032. These slow increments will give us a chance to absorb the new dollars, fund new programs like the pilot programs we just heard, and then making sure we're using them well, give us a chance to acknowledge that, examine that process. Along with that increase, we've acknowledged we need to focus on small and rural communities. Of STIF, it's like 80% goes to about 4 or 5 communities, of which TriMet is easily half of that. And so we acknowledge that a 0.1 to 0.2% increase for TriMet or for LTD is massive. But for some of our tribal communities or smaller transits, it's a couple $1,000, $10,000, not a lot, and not enough to buy a new bus or do any real meaningful service. So just, 8 hours ago, OTA voted to include a 7% of all new STIF would go towards small and rural communities. And we think that will hopefully be a meaningful amount. It equates to about it's $20-25 million for these communities. There's still lots of rules to be worked out. How does it work? What if there aren't enough small providers to provide that? But this is our way to include the small providers, small communities that need more than just a 0.1%, need this off the top kind of process. Other key bills for transit, there are a couple bills to end the STIF program, and there's one to move the STIF program to county control. We don't think ending STIF has any real legs. It's a conversation piece. It's kind of a cry to talk about these things. The move to county, again, I'm not sure we're going to see a lot of love from. Lane County doesn't want it. I've been talking to them. They're happy with LTD's work. However, I think it bodes to a question of the STIF process rules, the QE rules, how they're working and why, and kind of a cry for, let's look at them again without cracking open the whole process. So those conversations are happening. And then lastly, a bill just dropped on the last day. So Senate Bill 1124. This is to expand protection for our operators. Right now, it's only a Class 3 felony to assault an operator while they're in their vehicle, or their seat, driving the vehicle, operating a vehicle. As soon as they leave to help someone in the back, they lose that level of protection, that third level assault, pardon me. So this bill would expand it to being all their operations of their duty. So walking in the back to help someone out, walking to or from their bus, just sort of equalizes that protection. Other groups that have similar protections have it all the time they're working. For nurses, not just when they're doing nurse things, it's all the times. So looking to expand that playing field. My apologies to nurses everywhere. I'm clearly not a nurse. I was very disrespectful. Yeah, nurse things. So again, the goal is to equalize that, bring it back to a more stable level. And then lastly, March 11th, there'll be a transit panel on the Joint Committee on Transportation. We're still working out with our transit leadership what that will look like, but it'll be a few transit providers and then a second panel on transit users, businesses, nonprofits. They want to hear from a wide range of folks, so it won't just be me and TriMet and Rogue up there. We're trying to get smaller communities, a variety of folks to present, hearing from the nonprofits and the writers how the STIF funds matter, what works for them. That last slide kind of covers what I had planned here. Again, maybe vague at times intentionally. Never knew where today would take us a few weeks ago. So happy to field a few questions, time permitting.
Thank you, Sam. Lots of moving parts, so we appreciate the time and your speed. That's awesome. Rob, go ahead.
Forgive me if I'm prompting you. Do you want to mention Transit Day in the Capitol to this group?
Oh my goodness, I do. Yeah, so April 1st is also Transit Day in the Capitol. God, I'm so glad Rob is here. So this will be a big push of all transit providers to go. I'm sure I'll be there. I'm sure I'll bring a few folks along. We're still working on it. It just got dropped today. The invitation was sent.
And when is that happening?
April 1st.
So that's like in 4 weeks or something like that. We won't meet as a body. So if you want to talk to us about being follow up.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah.
Claire?
Any other questions or prompts?
Thank you. So I could be wrong, but I'm pretty certain nurses don't have any extra protections. We've been fighting for that. I work for the Oregon Nurses Association.
I would trust you.
I am a union rep for nurses. We have tried in the past, and it's not without controversy, but that was not why I hit my mic.
Thank you for the good
But
feedback.
I did hit my mic because I work for a labor union. I'm also a member of a labor union. I am curious, what is LTD's position on the labor rights that you talked about as being on the agenda?
Yeah, of course. A lot of the rules and the bills that are being passed right now are focusing on striking labor units. And currently ATU doesn't have the right to strike across Oregon. That was a right they voted on years ago.
Right.
So currently it's sort of a neutral stance. We don't want to try to get involved where we don't have a piece to play right now. And that's what the stance we've been taking.
Yep, that's what I thought. That's why I was curious.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just came off of a 50-day strike.
Yeah.
So not a fun time, but an important activity for workers to exercise their rights when they need to.
Absolutely.
Sam, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was lovely to be able to meet you for this team as well. Looking forward to more opportunities for updates.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Next up, so we have about, I can't do math right now. It's really late. About 7 minutes. So we'll go ahead and try to divide that time in half, potentially, and we will invite Matt. Thank you for being here,
Great,
Matt.
thank you very much. Matt, support the facility team and the capital improvement plan. I'll try to talk faster than Sam, but at any point you guys have any questions, I will stop and do it. But I will note last month we talked to the budget committee. This will be a similar conversation just to have. So if you guys are just itching to spend more time listening to me talk, more than my allotted 10 minutes now. Feel free to look at that. You can do that on double time and hear me speak even faster. But I just want to go and I'll pass some of the slides to kind of talk about our frame or next slide, please. We have a kind of idea of framework for our community investment plan. So one of the questions is what makes a project and how does a project become So I will kind of use a reference because this body got to listen to our statewide Transportation Improvement Fund projects where we came around the body and talked about what projects. So Sam alluded to some where he called it bike share. In the PowerPoint, we actually call it a way fancier name. It's like transit shared mobility services, I think we have. So not bike share, way cooler. But essentially that is the STIF program identified, hey, we see this need because Peace Health is going to be walking away from being a partner agency. How do we make sure that we can continue to provide that service throughout the community? But the STIF didn't fund 100% of that. And so that's why, as we're talking about in the legislative updates, we have an earmark that we're asking or seeking support from to kind of bridge that $1.3 million. Another thing, kind of just as projects are being talked about, LTD has, we did talk about Q-Strain. Q-Strain is our rear-facing ADA mobility device. Essentially, you get on the bus, you hit a button, and it does provide you security and an ability to not have to engage with the operator. You still can engage with an operator, but that was something that we piloted back in 2016. It was not a good pilot. So when you talk about pilots and ability to be nimble, that didn't work out well because the product just wasn't well developed. However, have been piloting since late last year to say, hey, you've obviously made some improvements. We have engaged and currently are communicating with the passengers to say, is this better for you? Do you guys feel more comfortable? And I see Scooter, thank you very much. A double thumbs up to say that this is something the technology is. And so some of those things as we're talking about, how does a project become? What gets brought forward? That not only comes from internal LTD, I'll use the term state of good repair. So this building, we have to maintain it. That's something we have to do from a state of good repair. Our buses have a lifespan of it. It's about minimum of 12 years. So state of good repair projects. And some of those are reflected here. And then I'll get to that very quickly. But some of those, as we talk about the projects that you'll see, rear facing ADA securement is one that from a community portion is like, hey, we see a need for this from independence, securement and options. Those are some how projects go. But a project, just because someone has a great idea, I have a lot of great ideas, I think. But then you talk to other people like, that's not a great idea. Just ask my wife. She lets me know about some of these myself. But some of the projects, you have a project kind of identified a need, but it doesn't make itself to be reflected in this plan. There is a vetting process. Let's slip to 3 slides from this is a timeline. So currently you see where we're at in February and March. We're looking at all of our CIP projects. And when I say CIP, that's community investment projects. We're asking some questions. What we think our costs are going to be, not only what we need for this fiscal year, but future fiscal years. As many of you guys came, you see this beautiful trailers out there, which are housing our operational staff because we're working on our projects here. Our projects team are consistent saying, what do we think we need? Or we're forecasting for the spend on this fiscal year. And are we going to be as productive as we thought, or do we need to make sure that we're budgeting for next fiscal year more? And so those are some things, and we're currently in update period. So as I said, I talked to the budget committee last month. We'll be bringing and having another conversation to say, what is our forecasted for the spend, this current spend, and what we need next spend. So right now we have, again, the CIP update. The CIP, just for why we do it, it helps actually provide LTD the ability to look at our long range financial plan. So we'll get to a place where we tier our projects. We have 3 different tiers. Tier 1, it's a funded project that we have a grant for or identified funding secured. Tier 2 looks at, hey, we have a planned process, like these are the funds that we're going to use, whether it's Sam referenced formula dollars. So we do receive formula dollars. So we're planning to use on this project these particular formula dollars, and here's our match. That will be reflected in this plan as well. And then tier 3, these are the projects that they're unfunded. We don't know how we're going to do it. We're going to continue to look at see how can we fund this if it's going to continue to move forward. Tier 3 projects, we will push those out past the year 3. So the next slide, you'll kind of get a visual. So if we don't have funding identified, we're not going to communicate to our partners like, hey, we're going to be doing this, because we first need to identify the funding and bring it in to start working the plan. Next slide, please. This is a high-level overview in regards to what we have. We'll get into some of the detail, but essentially you'll see that line that's at the bottom graph that kind of identifies. The stuff to the bottom is our state of good repair, things that we need to maintain to stay within compliance. And the stuff above that red line is those improvements. So if LTD chose to go out and build a new building, that would be considered an improvement, something that we don't have that we're going to make a major investment in. One of the projects that are considered tier 3, that would be an improvement. LTD is looking at, is there an option for a different propulsion type for our fleet? If there would be additional investments in regards to like a fueling station on site that cost a lot of money. And so you'll see that reflected. I'm going to pause because I need to, but ask, does anyone have any questions so far? Perfect. Next slide, please. So this will actually provide a little bit more detail. I will not get into all of those things, but it will show a project in the appendix. It'll provide some kind of quick project descriptions, but you'll kind of see, hey, here's what we're looking like for projects, and here's what we think we're going to be spending over the year. In this list of projects, you'll see the tiering to the right of the description. That we'll talk about, is it tier 1, is it fully funded, is it tier 1, or and sometimes a project can be tier 1 and tier 2 because we have funding for the first part and we have identified funding for the whole duration of the project identified. So you'll see that, and you'll see a lot of descriptions. Again, some of these projects were talked about in the STIF body that you guys participated in, gave input to then find itself on the plan. Next slide will show a funding. Kind of for every one of those projects, we have a funding strategy, and that's where you'll see some breakdowns. So some of the columns that we have are just formula funding. So here's what we're going to be doing, supporting our formula dollars for this, or STIF projects are located on there where it's identifying some of those costs. And then the far right column, just before the totals, it shows unfunding. And so it gives you kind of a breakdown of what LTD is looking like as far as funding. And again, this will help feed the long range financial plan to say, can we actually do what we think we're going to do in this particular plan? I feel like I'm going way fast. Thank you. So that's the improvement side. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the state of good repair. So these are assets that we currently have and we need to maintain. I'll just highlight in this one, you have a lot of facilities. We have to maintain our facilities. The other one, and the major kind of cost center in our community investment plan, is our fleet, which makes sense. We're a bus company primarily. That's what we choose to do. And so that costs are high. When you look at the plan, it's over, I think it's $131.8 million of the overall plan, which it makes sense, right? So where we're spending our money, the plan is about $260 million. Most of that is going to buses so that we can make sure that we replace. I will just highlight from a bus, our fixed route, what we call those, the longer 40-foot and 60-foot bus, that has a minimum useful life of 12 years. So every 12 years, you're planning, how do you repair or how do you replace those? Sometimes replacing a new bus, replacing an old bus with a new bus doesn't pan out where it's going to cost you less. We're experiencing, and at the board meeting or a special board meeting, we'll be talking about battery electric buses, what we're experiencing with buying those brand new buses, and how our cost of operation is more expensive as a result of those versus just the standard straight diesel. So sometimes you usually hope buying a new vehicle would lower your cost. That's not the case that we've been seeing with our electric buses. So it's also kind of identifying replacing some older buses, in theory, should help reduce our operational costs. I'll pause here to say anything else, but if not, I'll hit to the last slide, and that will just show you. Okay, Rob gives me this. The next slide is essentially the funding plan. Looking over that, I guess, Ms. Edwards. Rob was pushing me along to get out. He gave me the hook.
It's a fleet question, and I've been very curious about this, and maybe it was also kind of a Sam question, but I know the propulsion type, and you touched on it, the electric buses and, kind of the challenges with those, but I know that also the funding opportunities have been very limited. And so I know that in the conversations that LTD has had in past years about where do we go from here, I'm curious to know if the current administration plays a factor in that at all, if if you guys are having to think differently or plan differently, given the funding sources and what funding had previously been made available to. So it's just, it maybe is you can tell me that we can talk about it later, but I'm very curious about this.
Yeah, so LTD receives formula dollars, so the plan really identifies those formula dollars. FTA has not said, no, you can't use formula dollars to buy diesel. When you become more competitive in the past administrations that we have seen is when you go after those competitive grants, it usually looks better if you're going after zero emissions of some sort or a hybrid. And so a main funding source, which is a bus and bus facilities, I think it comes from, if you want to know, it's a 5339 discretionary. So you go after it. And usually if you say, hey, I want a diesel bus, they'd be like, that doesn't meet our criteria. You're not going to be able to get this discretionary dollars with it. We still can use our formula dollars. That's what's in the plan, is how we replace vehicles. We'll utilize formula. I think all of the buses, the majority of our buses that we bought that have been electric have been utilizing some of the discretionary dollars that we went after. Maybe not all of them, but a good majority to kind of give us a kickstart. But great question, Tiffany. I do think what Sam alluded to is what does the formula funds look like for LTD? Right now, I think it's up in the air. We're still planning on utilizing it because it does have a formula, and it seems to be bipartisan as far as it's still coming to LTD. The amount, I think, is the question that we need to kind of manage. All right, with that, I am concluded, I believe. Oh, sorry, this is very important. Since Springfield, City of Springfield this year, there's also other times where stuff comes up. Our community partners have projects we're keeping our ears to the ground to understand, but City of Springfield referenced the roundabout. They're doing design. If you actually are traveling on there, you're seeing surveyors out there quite a bit, kind of started to kind of map out. Sometimes the City of East Springfield's projects come and require LTD some sort of investment where we might not have a full clear picture of that. We do know that Mississippi project that was alluded to will essentially knock out one of our MX stations, what we call our Lexington eastbound. And so what does that look like? How do we continue? Do we reinvest in that area, not knowing the full plans of that, or how do we do that? But I guess more importantly, we know City of Springfield at this current rate is going to continue to do roundabouts going westward. We still have our Glenwood MX stations that we know are going to be impacted. We're keeping an eye on that so that when that comes, if we have an investment, we're going to find ourselves adding that to our community investment plan. And then the other thing is the City of Eugene currently has a section of what I think their Franklin Transform project that only gets us to about, or gets the City of Eugene to about Matt Knight Arena, but doesn't get us to Matt Knight all the way to what our Dad's Gate area is, which is when you're taking from Glenwood off to West 11. So we know that there's going to be stuff there that will impact two of our stations. We're keeping an eye on it. We're having conversations, but once we know more and can give a better timeline, that's when you'll find it in our community investment plan. So some of those projects that I referenced, when does a project become a project? Sometimes it's when City of Springfield or other community partners are saying, now. Thank you very much. Thanks, Brianna.
Let's make sure there's no slides. Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate that. I think folks were able to ask questions throughout. So I also want to recognize you had the longest amount of time that we wanted to give, and you cut it into the shortest amount. So gold stars to you. Thank you so much. And I'd like to, yeah, very, very awesome. Dave, when have you come up and speaking of transitions and things, we're looking at our plan going forward for this committee. So go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and committee members. So you have your AIS in front of you on this item. Hopefully you had a chance to review it. So this includes our draft work plan for the remainder of the year. And I owe the group an apology because at our last meeting in January, I said I was going to pull for some volunteers to come help with this effort, but we ran into some logistical issues. And thank you for those of you who did volunteer. We ran into some logistical issues, and to overcome those, Alma and I just met and hammered out a work plan for the group. So I hope you're okay with that. As you'll see in the AIS, the work plan serves as a structured roadmap for SPC activities in support of the committee's charge to provide independent advice to the LTD board, advance the goals of the long-range transit plan, it's so on and so forth. These are things that are in your bylaws. It's worth reminding the group that the work plan is a living document, subject to change. In fact, I heard two things tonight that lead me to think that we might be changing some of the work plan items, including considering monthly meetings, which I'm okay with if we want to do that. And then also bringing forward the performance metrics conversation regarding the rural services item to our May meeting. I'll just say, I think you got a little bit of a flavor for the types of the type of content that you can expect going forward in the work plan, notably having City of Springfield partners with us here, getting our committee educated about the types of issues that are happening more on the city agency side, and just how LTD can strategically interact and support that work. And so you got a sense of that tonight. We have more coming. So I'm going to start looking ahead to our next meeting in May. The 4 items that we have on our May meeting agenda so far would be a similar presentation from Eugene city staff. So we'll have transportation and land use staff from City of Eugene sort of doing the same show that Springfield provided tonight. We'll talk about another STIF discretionary funded project, which is the Eugene Downtown Services Pilot Project, anticipated to launch in the fall of this year. Transit bike share integration and what that means for the future of both LTD and the regional bike share system. And then we'd also like to cover a retreat, SPC retreat planning, as well as recruitment for new members. We did lose a couple of members this year already, so it's time to think about recruiting for some new members. So we'll bring those forward in May. In July, we've got 2 items so far, and the content will probably expand, obviously, as time goes on and projects pick up. In July, we've got an item on the Lane Coordinated Human Services Plan update. So this is a plan that looks at the needs around social service, human service providers, and how LTD can support those services through project and programmatic investments. It results in a project list, and similar to Matt's conversation there about the CIP, how a project becomes a project. Well, typically they start out in a plan and then they work their way into the CIP. We hope to have an update on the Attain project, which is the federally funded grant project in the Bethel area in July. In September, we've got the long-range mobility plan, and this is going to be a key project for strategic planning committee over the next year and a half. We're really going to rely on the SBC to provide strategic guidance on that plan, and that will take up more than just this meeting. I expect we'll have likely a standing meeting item on that one going forward. And then in November, SBC year in review. So we'd have an agenda item kind of covering what we worked on over the year and potentially a report to the board following that. And we're going to, believe it or not, we're going to start up on our STIF FY 28 and 29 planning later this fall, leading up to the winter. And then lastly is a service policy update. So LTD has an established service policy. We are going to need to update and amend that policy sometime toward the end of this year, early next year. So that's another one where, that talks about concepts around ridership versus coverage, vehicle capacity, passenger capacity, how we add or remove service when we need to, those sorts of things. So that's the work plan for the year. I hope that's insightful, and happy to take any questions or feedback on it. And we are looking for a motion to approve a work plan tonight.
Rob?
I don't want to approve it tonight, but I think this is a good sort of work in progress. So it's a concept that's fine. I first want to sort of applaud. I mean, we've got a real A team around here. I'm really impressed with sort of the diversity of viewpoints we bring here. We've got a Springfield City Councilor, Eugene City Councilor, County Commissioner, former City Councilor, ODOT. Somebody who used to work for LTD, some nonprofit folks. This is a really good team. We've had some really good discussions over the last several meetings. I really appreciate all the work we're doing and everybody here. So thank you. I think we can do better in a few ways. It's not really clear to me in what way that we're advising the board, and this work plan doesn't really make that clear. There's a bunch of topics here. We had four discussions tonight. I don't know where those interface with the board. To the extent that we're nominally advisory of the board, it'd be really clear to flag, we're doing this discussion here, the board, 1, 2, 3 months later, what is being asked of us. Or maybe not. Maybe we're more advisory or a sounding board for staff, and that would be fine too. But I think sort of understanding what's expected of us with each topic would be really useful. Second, there are now 5 great discussions tonight. I started losing it after 3 discussions. It's too much. We have to start meeting monthly if this is the amount of stuff that we need to do. This work plan is not reasonable. We don't have enough time to sort of digest and provide useful feedback. We're just beginning to absorb information, and then we've got to move to the next thing. So, thank you.
Appreciate that, Rob. Claire? And I just want to be mindful about,
Yes,
as you call for 30 more minutes, so.
Yeah, I agree to some extent with what Rob said. I like great presentations tonight, would have liked to have allowed them to be more leisurely. And so I would not object to moving to monthly meetings. I think to make this as useful a committee as it can be in the way that Rob was referencing, I think that would make sense. I do think, to some degree, when Jameson approached me to serve on this, he said it's only quarterly, right? Like that was a selling point. But I'm here, I'm willing to do the work, and think having that more leisurely experience and ability to limit topics in an evening is good. I did really appreciate having City of Springfield staff here to present. I think having partners, staff come to present increases the depth of information that we get, and the ability to interact with those staff, I think, is very important. So I really appreciate that and hope that will continue.
Tiffany?
Thank you, and thank you both. I will agree with a fair amount of what was said. I would also, the only thing I would say about the cadence of the meetings is while I do think that we're kind of rushed tonight, if not every other month, maybe as an ad hoc, like if there was some sort of flexibility with, maybe we don't meet every month, but on occasion when we didn't get through an agenda, instead of kind of rushing through, maybe we say, we need to carry over some of these items, and then maybe we can kind of adjust that way. So just as another suggestion. But again, if folks want to meet monthly and maybe a shorter duration of time, we could probably do a monthly 90-minute meeting, something like that, which I would also be okay with. So that's it.
Thanks, everyone. I just want to recognize that I don't know how long I've been on this committee, but we've done monthly, then quarterly, then every other month, and which is totally fine. But we evolve to the need. And I also think that, to the point that we brought up, there was no crystal ball, and there's a lot of things going on. So perhaps being able to get a poll out for monthly meetings, and if we don't need things, we can modify as we need. But I'm hearing that would be helpful than having everyone speed talk, which really appreciate it. It's good to learn about. But I want us to make sure, the space that we're using is going to be being mindful for what the need is. And also, as we look at adding more folks to the table and bringing different voices to the table, the opportunity to help, there might be spaces where we have topics that are more informational for learning, helping people understand, getting us all on the same page. So I just want to recognize that there'll be spaces for that, because we want to make sure that we have voices at the table, but transportation is huge. I'm learning more and more every single time. It's not my bailiwick. I would have never thought I'd be a chair of a committee like this, but it is helpful to learn. So, and I do, echoing Claire, having partners at the table to see how we are all an ecosystem working together is really, really helpful. And this space is going to be an ecosystem to bring those voices to the table to help us continue moving forward, as everyone says. So I really appreciate everyone's time here. We'll look at expanding times or having more meetings monthly, and we'll look at this a little bit more as well. So anything else for the good of the order? All right, I'm gonna use the gavel. Oh, go ahead, Rob. I can't use my gavel yet. Hurry.
a crest of the LTD board. I don't know why it exists this way, but apparently we're not allowed to form our own subcommittees, which is why we couldn't have a work plan committee. It feels to me like there will be times when we could be more efficient if we could do subcommittees and have that come back to us. So maybe there could be a discussion with the LTD board if there could be some flexibility around that. Otherwise, all of us have to talk about everything all the time, which seems to be inefficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We'll keep track of that. And so I'm going to go ahead and call it. I don't have glasses on right now. 7:33, 3 minutes over. Sorry, everyone. Thank you so much.